Picture a dark street in a city of 50,000 people. It is just past 1 o'clock in the morning. April 1945. The Netherlands. There is one man walking through the silence. He carries his weapon and extra gear, ready for a risky reconnaissance. He wears a patch over his left eye. He has a broken back that never fully healed. His best friend lies dead at the edge of town. His orders were simple: scout the enemy, report back, do not engage. What happens next goes beyond a standard reconnaissance, and some details are still debated. By morning, the city is no longer held the way it was, and Major's actions are often credited with helping trigger a German withdrawal. Canadian commanders were trying to avoid heavy fire that could endanger civilians, and the outcome helped limit damage in the city. And the city of Zwolle will be free for the first time in 5 years. His name is Léo Major, a Canadian private serving with reconnaissance troops, not an officer, and not a special forces unit. A 24-year-old French-Canadian soldier raised in Montreal, fighting with one working eye and a reputation for bold reconnaissance. What happened that night in Zwolle is one of the most remarkable acts of Canadian soldier heroism in the Second World War. But to understand it, you have to understand what brought him to that empty street, and what he was really fighting against. Here is where it begins. By April of 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final weeks. The Allied armies had crossed the Rhine into Germany. In the east, Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin. The Third Reich was collapsing, but in the Netherlands, the situation was still desperate. The Dutch people had endured 5 years of German occupation. In the western part of the country, the winter of 1944–45 had brought famine. It was called the Hunger Winter. Thousands of civilians were starving. The job of liberating the northern and eastern Netherlands fell to the 1st Canadian Army. It was the largest military force ever commanded by a Canadian general. Under General Harry Carrar, the army included the 2nd and 3rd Canadian Infantry Divisions, the 4th Canadian Armored Division, British and Polish units, and at times American forces as well. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division had been fighting since D-Day. They had landed on Juno Beach in Normandy on June 6, 1944. They had fought through France, Belgium, and the brutal Battle of the Scheldt in the fall of that year. By the spring of 45, these men were exhausted. But they kept moving north. Among the units in the 3rd Division was a French-speaking regiment from Quebec, le Régiment de la Chaudière, and in its scout platoon was Private Léo Major. Now, here is the tactical situation. In early April 1945, the Chaudière and the rest of the 3rd Division were pushing through the province of IJssel. They had taken Zutphen on April 8th. They had cleared Deventer on April 10th. The next objective was the city of Zwolle, roughly 100 kilometers east of Amsterdam. Zwolle was a city of about 50,000 people in the IJssel region, near important waterways and routes that mattered for movement and supply. The city had strategic importance because of its position on major road and rail routes. Whoever held Zwolle controlled access to the northern provinces. The Canadians expected the city to be defended by German troops, but the strength and exact composition were unclear. Estimates of German strength varied, and the Canadians could not be sure what they would face in the dark. The truth is, nobody knew for sure. German forces in the Netherlands were a patchwork by this point in the war. Some were disciplined regular troops. Some were teenagers from training battalions. Some were hardened SS fighters who would resist the last man. The Canadians had just seen exactly that kind of resistance at Zutphen, where the 362nd 1st Infantry Division, reinforced by young airborne trainees, had fought stubbornly before yielding on April 8th. And that was the problem. If the Canadians attacked Zwolle with artillery, they would destroy parts of the city and almost certainly kill Dutch civilians. If they sent infantry in blind, they could walk into a trap. So the commanding officer of the Chaudière asked for volunteers. He needed 2 men to slip into Zwolle under cover of darkness, find out where the Germans were positioned, and if possible, make contact with the Dutch resistance. Then the regiment could decide whether to bombard the city or find another way. 2 men stepped forward. One was Corporal Willie Arsenault, a 25-year-old from New Brunswick. The other was Private Léo Major. They were best friends. They were both snipers in the scout platoon, and they had both already survived things that should have ended their war a long time ago. To understand what Léo Major did that night, you need to understand what kind of soldier he already was. Léo Major was born on January 23, 1921 in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and was raised in Montreal in a French-Canadian family. His family moved back to Montreal when he was still an infant. He had a difficult childhood, marked by a painful relationship with his father. At 14, he left home. His father told him he would never amount to anything. Major decided to prove him wrong. In 1940, at the age of 19, he enlisted in the Canadian Army. He wanted to get overseas quickly, so rather than joining the Royal 22nd Regiment in Valcartier, he transferred to the Regiment de la Chaudière, which he believed would ship out sooner. He was right. By the fall of 41, he was training in England. He learned scouting, sniping, and reconnaissance. On D-Day, Major landed with the Chaudière at Bernier-sur-Mer on Juno Beach. On D-Day, he helped capture a German half-track carrying communications equipment. Days later, he ran into a small German patrol. He killed the soldiers, but one of them managed to set off a phosphorus grenade. The blast destroyed most of the vision in his left eye. The army wanted to send him back to England. Major refused. He told his superiors that a sniper only needs one good eye. He kept fighting. He wore an eye patch from that point on. Then came the Battle of the Scheldt in the fall of 44. During a solo reconnaissance, Major encountered German soldiers near a dike. He captured 2 of them, then used the prisoners to force the surrender of their commanding officer. In total, he marched 93 German soldiers back to Canadian lines, alone. Under fire from nearby SS troops who shot at their own surrendering men, killing 7 of them. For that action, Major was recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, one of the highest decorations a non-commissioned soldier could receive. He refused it. He said he did not want to accept any medal from the hand of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, whom he considered an incompetent commander. In February 1945, he was injured in a vehicle explosion and was sent to a hospital to recover. The blast threw him into the air. He suffered severe injuries and was told he would not return to combat. Doctors told him his war was over. Accounts describe him leaving the hospital early and making his way back toward friendly contacts as he recovered. He made his way to a Dutch family he knew in Nijmegen and spent nearly a month recovering. In late March, he limped back to his unit. He was still in pain. His back was not healed, but he was a soldier, and the war was not finished. So here is the picture. By April 13, 1945, the man volunteering to walk into an enemy-occupied city was half-blind, nursing a broken back, and had already been told twice that his war was over. Now watch what happens. On the evening of April the 13th, Major and Arsenault left the Canadian lines. According to one account, they departed around 9:30 at night, moving through the darkness toward Zwolle. Their orders were clear. Scout the German positions. Contact the Dutch resistance if possible. Return before dawn, when the Canadian artillery would be ready to open fire on the city. But the 2 friends had a private agreement. They did not want Zwolle to be destroyed. If they could manage it, they were going to try to push the Germans out themselves. It was a decision far beyond their orders, far beyond what any private and corporal were authorized to do. They reached a farmhouse on the outskirts of Zwolle, the home of a Dutch man named Hendrik van Gerner. The farmer gave them rough positions of German defenses near the railway tracks that ringed the southern edge of the city. Armed with this information, Major and Arsenault moved closer. Around midnight, as they approached the railway, a German machine gun opened fire from a concealed position. Arsenault was hit by German fire outside the city and was killed. What happened next is where the legend and the verified facts begin to separate. What we know for certain from the official record is this. Major killed at least 2 of the German soldiers at the position. The rest fled in a vehicle. And then Major made a decision that no order required and no superior authorized. He was going into Zwolle, alone. In a later interview, Major said that after Arsenault's death, something changed inside him. After his friend was killed, Major later described feeling shocked and intensely determined to continue the mission. But he did control it. He channeled it. He gathered what he could from their equipment and continued toward the city, and he began walking toward the city. Here is where we need to pause and be honest about the history. The events of that night inside Zwolle are the subject of debate among historians. Major told different versions of the story over the years, and some of the details do not match. Dutch historians at the Netherlands Institute for Military History have noted that Canadian regimental war diaries contain only a brief account. They record that Major was sent on reconnaissance and reported the next morning that the city had been vacated. Some researchers have found no archival evidence for the capture of prisoners inside Zwolle that night. So here is what we can say with confidence, based on the Distinguished Conduct Medal citation and reputable historical summaries. Major entered the center of Zwolle around 1 o'clock in the morning on April the 14th. He found the streets silent and largely deserted. For approximately 6 hours he moved through the city. His official citation states that he contacted the Dutch underground resistance movement. He organized the local Dutch civilians into patrols and positioned them at strategic points around the city. The effect was that the German garrison found itself threatened from both inside and outside. The resistance fighters knew the streets far better than the occupiers did. They could appear and disappear through alleyways and back gardens. For a German soldier woken in the middle of the night by gunfire, the sight of armed Dutch civilians at intersections would have deepened the impression that a coordinated assault was underway. To increase the pressure, Major set fire to the Gestapo headquarters. The building was a symbol of 5 years of fear and repression. As flames climbed into the night sky, the smoke and glow would have been visible across the city. It was a signal, whether Major intended it that way or not. The occupation was ending. The popular version of the story, which Major himself told in various interviews over the decades, adds vivid detail. In that telling, he ran through the streets firing his weapons and throwing grenades to simulate a large-scale Canadian attack. He entered a bar where German officers were drinking and captured a French-speaking officer, possibly from the Alsace region. He told the officer that Zwolle was surrounded by an overwhelming Canadian force and that a devastating bombardment would begin at dawn. He then released the officer, hoping the man would spread the word to the rest of the garrison. Some accounts say Major even returned the officer's sidearm to make the encounter seem more official. Whether every detail of the popular account is precisely accurate, the outcome is not in dispute. By roughly 4:30 in the morning, the German garrison began withdrawing westward across the IJssel River. The enemy chose to leave. They were not overrun by a battalion. They were not defeated in pitched combat. They withdrew in large part because of the actions of one man and a handful of Dutch resistance fighters who made themselves visible at just the right moment. Now think about this from the German side. This is the unforced error at the heart of the story. The garrison did not have to leave. Even in the last weeks of the war, German units in the Netherlands were still fighting hard. Just days earlier, SS troops in Groningen had resisted the 2nd Canadian Division for 4 straight days in savage street-to-street combat, losing 2,400 prisoners before finally surrendering on April the 16th. But in Zwolle, the situation was different. The garrison commanders were making a calculation that thousands of German officers were making all across the collapsing front in April of 45. The war was clearly lost. Berlin was about to fall. Was it worth dying for a city in the Netherlands that the Reich was never going to hold? The combination of gunfire, explosions, resistance patrols appearing throughout the city, a building blazing in the night, and a confident enemy soldier telling them that thousands of Canadians were coming was enough. The garrison made their calculation, and they chose to cross the IJssel and withdraw. He was not brave because he was fearless. He was brave because he calculated that audacity would save more lives than patience. And he was right. When the city finally fell quiet, Major linked up with members of the Dutch resistance who confirmed that the Germans had gone. He had been awake and moving for nearly the entire night, carrying weapons, throwing grenades and negotiating with enemy officers, all on a back that had been broken just 2 months before. But he had one more thing to do. His official citation records that at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, Major waded across a canal, then made his way back to the outskirts where Arsenault's body lay near the Van Gerner farm. Exhausted, soaking wet, he picked up his friend and carried him back. He returned to Canadian lines around 9 o'clock in the morning. The report he delivered was simple. Zwolle was clear. The Germans had withdrawn. The planned artillery bombardment was cancelled. The Regiment de la Chaudière entered the city without firing a single shot. For the first time in 5 years, Zwolle was free. Think about what that meant for 50,000 people. No shells falling on their homes. No fires from artillery strikes. No crossfire in their streets. The city they had lived in through 5 years of occupation was handed back to them, intact because one soldier decided that an artillery barrage was not the only option. for his actions, Private Léo Major was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. This time, he accepted it. Now, here is the part that was kept as an open loop. What did the officers say when they found out what he had done? The record on this is quiet. The regimental war diary treats it almost as routine. Major came back. The city was clear. The regiment moved in. In the official military world of 1945, there were no dramatic confrontations or formal reprimands recorded for exceeding his reconnaissance orders. Major had delivered results. The city was taken without a shot. In wartime, especially in the final chaotic weeks of a collapsing enemy, that was enough. His biographer, Luce Lapine, later described Major as a loose cannon, a skinny kid from the wrong side of the tracks who was not afraid of anything. But he was also resourceful, independent, and above all, effective. The museum director at the Musée Regiment de la Chaudière in Lévis, Quebec, called him the Rambo of Quebec. But then he added that when you check the records, the story holds up. It is worth noting that some historians urge caution with the more dramatic elements of the story. Researchers at the Netherlands Institute for Military History found no corroborating evidence in the archives for the prisoner captures inside Zwolle. The Stadsmuseum in Zwolle announced in 2025 that it would conduct a formal historical review of the account, seeking more nuance. What remains beyond dispute is that Major spent hours inside the city, that he contacted the resistance, that the Gestapo headquarters burned, that the Germans withdrew, and that his regiment entered the next day unopposed. Major never talked about Zwolle to his family. His son Daniel Amy was 9 years old when a Dutch official arrived at their home in Montreal, roughly 30 years after the war, and told the family what their father had done. When his wife asked why he had never mentioned it, Major said he did not think anyone would believe him. The people of Zwolle never forgot. In the decades after the war, the city named a street after Léo Major, the Léo Majorlan. It translates to Léo Majorlan. The sign reads, in Dutch, Canadian First Liberator of Zwolle, 1921 to 2008. They also honored his friend. A park in Zwolle is dedicated to the memory of Willie Arsenault, the corporal who gave his life at the city's edge. In 2005, 60 years after the liberation, Zwolle made Léo Major an honorary citizen of the city. He and his wife Pauline traveled back to the Netherlands for the ceremony. Photographs from that visit show an elderly man standing beneath his own street sign, visibly moved. In 2008, Major died in Montreal at the age of 87. Dutch dignitaries, including the mayor of Zwolle, traveled across the Atlantic to attend his funeral. In 2018, more than 70 years after that night, fans at a football match for PEC Zwolle, the local soccer club, unfurled an enormous banner across the stands. It declared Léo Major the sole savior of Zwolle. The liberation story is still taught in local schools. A resident of Zwolle wrote in an online tribute after Major's passing, "He was the first Canadian soldier I saw, on the 14th of April 1945, and with him came the freedom from 5 years of dictatorship. I was a boy of 14. His appearance was the beginning of a new life for all of us." In 2020, Canada Post issued a stamp in Major's honor on the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. A bronze bust of him stands on a stone pedestal in Zwolle, looking out over the city he freed in a single spring night. Léo Major remains the only Canadian to have received the Distinguished Conduct Medal in 2 separate wars. He earned the second one in Korea in 1951, when he led 18 scouts in a nighttime assault that recaptured a strategic hilltop from Chinese forces, then held it for 3 days against repeated counterattacks. He spent the rest of his life working as a pipe fitter in Montreal. He married Pauline de Crocel in 1951. They had 4 children. He lived in near total anonymity in Canada, even as he was celebrated as a hero across the ocean. Let us go back to where we started. A dark street. 1 o'clock in the morning. A man with one eye and a broken back walking into an occupied city. He was not ordered to do what he did. He was told to look and report. Instead, he looked, decided the cost of waiting was too high, and acted. His friend was dead. 50,000 people were about to have their city shelled, and he believed that one man, moving fast enough and loud enough, could change the outcome. He was right. The Germans did not have to leave Zwolle. They chose to. That is the unforced error that defines this story. An entire garrison looked at the chaos one Canadian private had created, weighed their options in the final days of a dying war, and decided it was not worth staying. Léo Major walked into a city held by the enemy and walked out with a liberated town behind him. He carried his dead friend's body on the way back. And then he said nothing about it for 30 years. There is a street in Zwolle named after a Canadian soldier who liberated a town, and every year, the people who live on that street remember why it has his name.